Yeah, I'm savage! I'm a savage! Oh! I'm a savage! Whatever I want, I'm going to get! Whatever I want, I have to get! Yes! What's next? What's next? I gotta get it. I'm not gonna stay fucking down. I'm not gonna stay fucking lying down. I'm not. I can't do it, man. I can't do that. What's next? Give me something else. What can't you do? I can do it. I can do anything.
What is up, you guys? It's your girl, Dominique. You already know I'm about to what?
Dime on them niggas.
And topping our news today, you guys, we got a crazy case with $30 million lawsuit. Yes, you heard me, $30
million? And who you think you kidnapped, Chelsea Clinton?
Nope, not Chelsea, but a 19-year-old named Cassie. All right, let's get into it. And you guys know that Cassie and Diddy were together for about a good decade or 11 years or so. She has since moved on and had 2 children with her husband. But you guys already know anytime I start the video off with a little drama, it's going to be a what? Doozy. And today ain't no different. You guys, you already know we're going to have to go down this rabbit hole. And yes, you're coming with me. Let's get into it. All right, you guys, we're going to be talking about music mogul, entrepreneur, there's so many titles behind Puff Daddy name, but the most important title right now that we are worried about is an abuser. Yes, and some words are sensitive on YouTube or any platform that you're watching at this point, but you already know where we're going with this. He has been basically convicted. Well, I'm not going to say convicted. That's another thing that we need to get into because he has not actually admitted to any guilt or any wrongdoing in this lawsuit. And when I tell you they wrapped this up so fast, I ain't even finished reading the paperwork, but that's what we're going to get into. I'm going to be able to read the paperwork that Cassie's full civil case. You guys know, like I said, Puff Daddy has been involved with a lot of women, many women. He has had multiple kids by, I believe he has, 3 different baby mamas? 3 by the late Kim Porter, God rest her soul. She also has a son with what's the DeBarge dude? What's his name? I'll be sure. She also Puff Daddy also has taken in her child, raised them as her own. Puff Daddy also had a baby with another woman at the same time he had his twins, so they have actually, as they call them, ghetto triplets at this point. But like I said, Puff Daddy has a history of dating a lot of women, from J-Lo to even rumored being with Cameron Diaz, child, Naomi Campbell, Miracle Watts. Did y'all know that? I ain't know about that, but don't think nothing past it. But anyway, Lori Harvey, as well as Gina. Like I said, this is going to be a big breakdown, so I'm going to make this into 2 parts. Recently, he's been with our girl, Creisha, Young Miami. But in the middle of all of this, there was Cassie, and that's what we're going to get into. Like I said, Cassie and P. Diddy originally started dating back in 2007. They came public in 2012, and there's been a lot of rumors about the abuse, but no one has actually came forward, and till now, I guess. And that's what we're going to get into. Today, I'm going to be reading Cassie's actual full court document, silver case. And there's a lot of questions going around. Did she do this just for money? Did she do this, go do all of this just because she just wanted to kill the next black man? And it has nothing to do with that. What this man did to her, I'm telling you guys, was just despicable. It was horrible. But at the end of the day, does she deserve her bag? Hell yeah. This girl is suffering from actual brain loss from the beatings that she has suffered allegedly from P. Diddy. And I have to say allegedly because, like I said, they have actually settled this case. Like I said, they wrapped this up in a day. You hear me? So, but in these court documents, we're going to really get down to the nit of the grid of what he did to this girl. Like I said, this is going to be graphic, and I do issue a caution. If anyone has ever been in a situation like this might be very triggering. The stuff that we're about to discuss, I don't wish on no one. But like I said, we're going to make 2 parts to this. But let's get into what was actually in the court documents. All right, you guys. Now I'm going to take this time to read to you the full civil case by Cassie. Basically, we're going to start with the beginning. Please be advised. Trigger warning. We're going to be dealing with essay, assault, graphic information. But let's start from the beginning. United States District Court, Southern District of New York. Cassandra Ventura versus Sean Combs, Bad Boys Entertainment, Bad Boy Records, Epic Records, Comb Enterprises, LLC, and Doe Corporations. Alright, like I said, trigger warning. This is literally on the front of it. This document contains highly graphic information of sexual nature, including essay assault. Plaintiff Cassandra Ventura, Miss Ventura, hereby alleges as and for her complaint against defendant Sean Combs, Mr. Combs, Bad Boy Entertainment, Bad Boy Records, Epic Records, Combs Enterprise, LLC, and Doe Corporations 1 through 10, together defendant corporations, and together with Mr. Combs, defendant as follows. Preliminary statement. Defendant Sean Combs is a rapper and a record executive, popular known by his stage names Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, or Diddy. Mr. Combs came to fame in the early 1900s with his record label Bad Boy Records. He rose to prominence in the music and entertainment industry over the decades and regularly referred to as hip-hop mogul. In 2022, Mr. Combs received the Lifetime Achievement Award at the BET Awards. During his acceptance speech, Mr. Combs stated, "I have to give a special shout-out thank you, love to the people that was really there for me." He named a number of people before adding, "and also Cassie for holding me down in the dark times, love." The truth, however, is that Cassie, Mrs. Cassandra Ventura, was held down by Mr. Combs and endured over a decade of his violent behavior and disturbed demands. For Miss Ventura, the dark times were those she spent trapped by Mr. Combs in a cycle of abuse, violence, and sex trafficking, among other violent and unlawful acts. Mr. Combs Miss Ventura in her own home after she tried to leave him, often punched, beat, kicked, and stomped Miss Ventura, resulting in bruises, burst lips, black eyes, and bleeding. Blew up a man's car after he learned that he was romantically interested in Miss Ventura. Forced Miss Ventura into engage in sex acts with male ex-workers and masked aiding and filming the encounters. Ran out of his apartment with a firearm to pursue a rival industry executive who he learned was nearby, and people are saying that was actually Suge Knight. Let's keep going. Demanding that Miss Victoria to carry his firearm in her purse just to make her uncomfortable and demonstrate how dangerous he is. And introduced Miss Ventura to a lifestyle of excessive alcohol and substance abuse and required her to procure illicit drugs to satisfy his own addictions. Miss Ventura met Mr. Combs in 2005 when she was 19 and he was 37 years old. He signed her to his label Bad Boys, and within a few years lured Miss Ventura into a structured, fast-paced, and drug-filled lifestyle and into a romantic relationship with him. Her boss, one of the most powerful men in the entertainment industry and a very cruel and controlling man, nearly 2 decades her senior. Mr. Combs asserted complete control over Miss Ventura's personal and professional life, thereby ensuring her inability to escape his hold. He provided unprecedented avenues for success for the inspiring artist, but in return demanded obscene loyalty and silence. Throughout their relationship, Mr. Combs was prone to uncontrollable rage and frequently beat Miss Ventura savagely. These beatings were witnessed by Mr. Combs' staff and employees of Bad Boy Entertainment and Mr. Combs' related businesses, but no one dared to speak out against their frightened and ferocious boss. Following these episodes of horrific abuse, Mr. Combs would immediately attempt to hide Miss Ventura in evidence of his violent rage. He often showered her with gifts following incidents of physical violence, a typical pattern of behavior by serial abusers. In addition to the physical assaults, Mr. Combs frequently reminded Miss Ventura of his ability to cause serious harm, whether by requiring her to carry his gun in her purse or by blowing up the car of a musician that was romantically interested in Miss Ventura. Supposedly that was Kid Cudi. Let's keep going. Adding insult to injury, Mr. Combs, I keep calling him Miss Child. Mr. Combs used illegal substances and threats of violence to force Miss Ventura into repeated unwanted sexual encounters with male sex workers. Over the years that Mr. Combs abused Miss Ventura physically and sexually, she again and again tried to escape his tight hold over her life. Every time she hid, Mr. Combs' vast network of corporations and affiliate entitles found her, and those who worked for Mr. Combs' companies implored her to return to him. Many went as far as to explicitly state that her failure to return to Mr. Combs would hinder her success in the entertainment industry. When she believed that she had finally separated from her longtime abuser, she joined Mr. Combs for a dinner, after which he forced her into her home and raped her while she repeatedly said no and tried to push him away. Miss Victoria has now fully escaped Mr. Combs, but the harm that the assaults had sexual abuse he caused her to experience for nearly a decade will forever haunt her. She has required intense medical and physiological care to recover from the trauma she lived through. She cannot, however, continue to live in silence about what she endured. Mr. Combs remains immensely powerful and immensely dangerous. Miss Ventura therefore seeks justice for the decade of life that Mr. Combs took away from her and threats of violence, excessive use of drugs, physical and psychological abuse, and slavery. According to Miss Ventura, bringing this action seeking injustice, declaratory, and monetary relief against defendants in violation of federal ex-trafficking laws. It has the number of the laws, the New York State Human Rights Law, the New York State Human Rights Law NYC Administration, the Gender Motivated Violence Act NYC Administration, the New York Services for Victims of Human Trafficking, the California Ex-Abuse and Cover-Up Accountability Act, Civil Procedures, and also California Trafficking Victims Protecting Act. Okay? jurisdiction and venue. So this is, I guess, where it's going to be, where it's found out. The court has jurisdiction pursuant an action of assault violations and therefore raises federal questions regarding the deprivation of the plaintiff's rights. The court has some mental jurisdiction over plaintiff's related claims arising under state and city law pursuit. Venue and proper is in the court because of the substantial part of the events or omissions given rise to these actions, including the lawful employer practices and intentional and negligent treacherous conduct alleged herein occurred in this district. Parties. Plaintiff Cassandra Ventura is a resident of the state of California and Connecticut and was employed by defendants Bad Boy Records, LLC, and Bad Boy Entertainment and related entities, among them Doe Corporations 1 through 10 from 2006 to 2019. At all relevant times herein, Ms. Ventura met the definition of an employee of defendants under all relevant statutes. Defendant Sean Combs, upon information and belief, resides within the state of California. At all relevant times herein, Mr. Combs met the definition of an employer of plaintiff under all relevant statutes. Defendant Bad Boy Entertainment is a music media entertainment company founded by defendant Sean Combs, which includes the record label Defendant Bad Boy Records, LLC. At all relevant times, defendant was an employer of plaintiff within the meaning of all applicable statutes. Defendant Bad Boy Records, LLC is a Delaware limited liability company with a principal place of business located in New York, New York. At all relevant times, defendant was an employer of plaintiff within the meaning of all applicable statutes. Defendant Epic Records is a New York-based record label based by Sony Music Entertainment, a subsidiary of Sony Corporation of America. At all relevant times, defendant was an employer of plaintiff within the meaning of applicable status. Oh God, try and go to the next page. Give me a second, y'all. Like I said, this is so much. I had to print this out. I could not read this off the screen. Okay, Defendant Combs Enterprises LLC is a New York limited liability company at all relevant times. Defendant was an employer of plaintiff within the meaning of all applicable status. Do they say status or status? Anyway, Defendant Doe Corporations 1 through 10 are corporations and entities affiliated and associated with defendant Sean Combs and defendant corporations at all relevant times. Defendant Doe Corporations 1 through 10 were employers of plaintiff within the meaning of all applicable status. Okay, now we're going to get down to this is the real charges, and I guess her statement of actually what was happening, and it's labeled in big bold parentheses, factual allegations. Teenage Miss Ventura meets middle-aged Mr. Combs as her career begins. Miss Ventura met Mr. Combs in late 2005 and early 2006 after Mr. Combs heard Miss Ventura's first single playing in a club and expressed interest in signing her to his label Bad Boy Records. At the time, Miss Ventura was 19 years old. Mr. Combs was 37 years old. Within months, in February 2006, Miss Ventura signed a 10-album deal with Mr. Combs' record label. Are you kidding me? Do we even know of one Cassie album? Oh my gosh. Miss Ventura's first album, Cassie, was released in August 2006, debuting at number 4 on the U.S. Billboard 200. To promote the album, Miss Ventura made television appearances at MTV's Total Request Live and BET's 106 in Park. Miss Ventura suffered from significant performance anxiety during these appearances, and press outlets were highly critical of Miss Ventura's performances on these shows. Mr. Combs, however, sought to rehabilitate his newly signed talent, telling TMZ News, "You could hear the nervousness in her voice, and to be honest, I kind of smiled at it because it made me really appreciate what I really love about her. She's a regular person. It just made me appreciate that she got nervous, and it was kind of cute to me, to be honest. You got to understand that success for her is coming out of nowhere. It's just so huge, and sometimes everybody handles it differently." While clearly paternalistic in noting that it was cute to him how regular Miss Ventura appeared, Mr. Combs' comments range true to some extent. Upon singing with Bad Boy Records, Miss Ventura was quickly thrust into the spotlight and was unfamiliar with how to navigate her new celebrity status. Mr. Combs' recognition and glorification of Miss Ventura's naive proved to set the groundwork for his manipulation and coerced romantic relationship with Miss Ventura, a woman nearly 2 decades his junior. Within a year of signing with Bad Boys Records, Mr. Combs became deeply entrenched in Miss Ventura's life, almost immediately asserting possession and control over her and inserting himself into all aspects of her career and professional life. In November 2006, Mr. Combs invites Miss Ventura to perform his song Come to Me along with him at the MTV Europe Music Awards in Copenhagen, Denmark. After rehearsal for the performance, Mr. Combs walked around in a row with a drink in his hand, flaunting his lavish party lifestyle to his label newly signed artists. During hair and makeup leading up to the performance, Miss Ventura's hairstylist, Mr. Combs' makeup artist, told Miss Ventura that Mr. Combs was interested in Miss Ventura. Miss Ventura shrugged off the gossip and, in fact, expressed disgust given the large age gap between her and the president of the record label. Emphasizing the age and power dynamic early on in their working relationship, Mr. Combs positioned himself as a father figure and protector of Miss Ventura by the way of example after returning to New York after a trip to Las Vegas, during which she endured a brief hospital stay. Miss Ventura, who by then was fully healthy, went out to a club with her friends. When Mr. Combs saw her out, he reprimanded her, telling her to go home and take care of herself. At the time, Miss Ventura thought that her record label was looking out for her well-being and that Mr. Combs had her best interests in mind. Mr. Combs also ensured he was intertwined with Mrs. Ventura's personal and social life for interest by inviting himself to Miss Ventura's 21st birthday party in Las Vegas. He also brought along famous musicians and producers, thereby flaunting his celebrity status and influence in front of a young, impressionable Miss Ventura. Although Mr. Combs knew that Miss Ventura was in a relationship at the time, and even though he was publicly in a relationship with Kim Porter, the late Kim Porter, may she rest in peace, Mr. Combs nevertheless pursued Miss Ventura. At an after party in a hotel suite following Miss Ventura's 21st birthday party, Mr. Combs pulled Miss Ventura into a bathroom and forcibly kissed her. Miss Ventura did not consent to this unwanted contact. She immediately ran out of the bathroom in the hotel suite and cried. She told her best friend at the time about what happened, but was too scared to tell anyone else. At the Video Music Awards the following day, Miss Ventura's boyfriend at the time joined her and Mr. Combs at the table at the award ceremony. Mr. Combs became angry, telling Miss Ventura that the invitation to the award ceremony was only for her and not for her significant other. Mr. Combs lures Miss Ventura into a relationship. Title. Despite her clear rejection of Mr. Combs' advances, Mr. Combs continued to demand Miss Ventura spend time with him, including for a weekend at Mr. Combs' residence in Miami for nights out in New York City. On one particular night, around September 2007, Mr. Combs insisted on taking Miss Ventura out. Miss Ventura acquiesced, fearing that rejecting Mr. Combs' request would have repercussions for her album deal with Mr. Combs and his company, Bad Boy Records. Mr. Combs picked Miss Ventura from her apartment in Manhattan in a blue luxury vehicle. Miss Ventura was surprised that when she got into the car, Mr. Combs was already inebriated. He handed her a pill and told her to take it. When Miss Ventura asked what the pill was, Mr. Combs dismissed her and told her she would like it. She later learned the pills were ecstasy, something Miss Ventura had never before tried and did not want to try. This was the first time Mr. Combs got Miss Ventura high. Mr. Combs then proceeded to drive recklessly at high speeds down the West Side Highway of Manhattan. Miss Ventura was very scared, but did not dare to object to Mr. Combs, who appeared drunk, high, and agitated. Mr. Combs took Miss Ventura to an upscale lounge in downtown Manhattan, where he proceeded to get into an altercation with the security staff, who would not permit Mr. Combs to enter, presumably because he was inebriated. Miss Ventura decided to go home, but for the remainder of the night, Mr. Combs messaged Miss Ventura, incessantly complaining that he left him high and alone. In early fall 2007, Mr. Combs flexed his power and influence when he paid a promoter to create a fake flyer for a party hosted by Miss Ventura. This fake posting allowed Miss Ventura to have an excuse to go to Miami, Florida, and get her away from her boyfriend by using the gush of a legitimate event she had to attend. Miss Ventura was stunned at how easily Mr. Combs was able to recruit others to lie for him. Miss Ventura was uncomfortable with the fake flyer, but because the request to go to Miami was made by the owner of the record label, and because she was scared to go against his wishes and face repercussions to her nascent career, Miss Ventura agreed to join Mr. Combs in Florida. During this trip to Florida, Mr. Combs provided Miss Ventura with copious amounts of drugs. She became more intoxicated than she ever had before, and her intoxication lasted throughout the weekend trip. As she wanted Mr. Combs to continue to support her career, she felt she could not refuse Mr. Combs, urging her to take more drugs. After providing her with drugs, Mr. Combs had sexual encounters with Miss Ventura during this trip. Within 2 years of meeting Mr. Combs, Miss Ventura found herself lured into an immediate circle of her boss, the owner of the record label and one of the most powerful men in the entertainment industry. Mr. Combs asserts control over Miss Ventura's career and personal life. Let's read. From the very start of their relationship, Mr. Combs asserted his power and influence over Miss Ventura. This dynamic was fueled by a nearly 20-year age difference, as well as their relative positions in the entertainment industry, with Mr. Combs considering a music mogul and Miss Ventura at the very start of her career as an entertainer. Mr. Combs' aggressive and demanding approach to those who worked with made it impossible for anyone to challenge him, and Miss Ventura soon learned that Mr. Combs insisted on blind loyalty for everyone in his inner circle. Although Miss Ventura had saved up some earnings from her young modeling career, Mr. Combs' extensive display of wealth was intimidating to her. Mr. Combs paid for things with wads of cash and would repeatedly tell Miss Ventura, "Don't worry about money, I have money." Mr. Combs expense lavish vacations for him and Miss Ventura, purchased a car for her, paid for her apartment, and provided her with extensive amounts of designer clothing. Around 2008 or 2009, Mr. Combs began to rent an apartment in Manhattan for Miss Ventura. The apartment was then walking distance of Mr. Combs' New York residence. He first showed Miss Ventura the apartment by bringing her there along with her parents. Miss Ventura's parents were skeptical of the mogul's display of wealth, but proud of their daughter's newfound success. Around 2010, Mr. Combs seemingly paid for an apartment for Miss Ventura in Los Angeles, which located about 5 minutes away from Mr. Combs' residence. He paid for many of her apartments in California and also purchased a Jaguar for her around 2013 or 2014. All aspects of Miss Ventura's life were controlled by either Mr. Combs or his management companies. Every event Miss Ventura attended, from the travel to the makeup and clothing, was paid for directly by Mr. Combs and his affiliated companies. Compounding all this encompassing intrusion into her life, Mr. Combs secured his control over the young and impressionable Miss Ventura by introducing her to a drug-fueled lifestyle and kept her complicit and compliant. Mr. Combs first introduced Miss Ventura to opiates around 2008 and would often have pills and other drugs out in the open like candy. Upon information and belief, Mr. Combs had been addicted to prescription painkillers, and took ecstasy frequently. At first, Miss Ventura was given the prescriptions that Mr. Combs received from a doctor in Miami, Florida. Eventually, Mr. Combs exhausted his supply of pills. He demanded that Miss Ventura procure prescriptions from this Miami doctor in her own name. Mr. Combs also became deeply involved in Miss Ventura's personal life, with his personal staff attending to Mrs. Ventura's day-to-day travel and other needs, including medical care. On multiple occasions, Mr. Combs had Miss Ventura's personal medical records sent directly to his email address. For instance, Miss Ventura began experiencing memory loss, potentially due to excessive drug use and or head injuries caused by Mr. Combs' beating and described below. Her MRI results were provided directly to Mr. Combs. Mr. Combs also repeatedly arranged for his staff to drive Miss Ventura to certain doctor's appointments. In this way, Mr. Combs exerted ownership over Miss Ventura. As another example of the ways in which he manipulated Miss Ventura and ensured obedience early on in their relationship, he asked Miss Ventura what she called her grandfather. When Miss Ventura said that she referred to her grandfather as Pop Pop, Mr. Combs perversely inserted that Miss Ventura referred to him with that nickname. Ew. Oh, let's keep going. Mr. Combs and Miss Ventura's relationship became violent and abusive. When started as a whirlwind of celebrity meetings and drug and alcohol-fueled parties, however, quickly turned frightening and violent. Miss Ventura was also exposed to intense violence that prevailed Mr. Combs' rise to fame. For example, on one occasion, Mr. Combs and Miss Ventura was using drugs together in his home. One of his security guards barged in and announced that Suge Knight, a longtime rival of Mr. Combs, was spotted at Mel's drive-in diner in Los Angeles. Mr. Combs began to get dressed, retrieved multiple pals from his safe, and ran out of his home to where he believed Mr. Knight was dining. I told you that's what they said that was. Miss Ventura became terrified and began to cry. On at least 2 occasions, Mr. Combs demanded that Miss Ventura hold Mr. Combs' gun in her purse. Miss Ventura had no familiarity with guns and was petrified that the firearm would accidentally go off in her purse. There was no real reason why Mr. Combs required her to hold his weapons, except to reinforce to his young girlfriend that he was violent, powerful, and dangerous. Over the next decade, multiple times each year, Mr. Combs will violently beat Miss Ventura, leaving bruises on her body. After every instance in which he beat Miss Ventura, Mr. Combs used his money and power to orchestrate extensive efforts to hide the evidence of his abuse, including by hiding Miss Ventura in hotels for days at a time to let her bruises heal. Wow. In one such instance, after a party with Jay-Z, Mr. Combs beat Miss Ventura repeatedly in the Escalade, including by kicking and hitting her. He forced her out of the vehicle on 5th Avenue in New York City. She was eventually able to hail a cab and get to her apartment in Miami, where she cried in fear, realizing there was no way she could tell about what had happened at the hands of this incredible, powerful man. She spent the subsequent 3 days hiding in her apartment. Damn. In January 2009, after Mr. Combs learned that Miss Ventura spoke to another music manager at a party in Los Angeles, he became enraged. She had hoped speaking to this manager would allow her to further grow her career and that Mr. Combs would be happy for her, but instead, he became extremely angry and pulled her out of the club where the party was taking place. In the car leaving the club, Mr. Combs beat Miss Ventura, pushing her into a corner of the vehicle and stomping on her face. Mr. Combs' security staff, Roger Bounds, tries to stop the beating but was unable to de-escalate the situation. When the car arrived at Mr. Combs' residence, Miss Ventura attempted to run away, but Mr. Combs followed her, and proceeded to again kick her in the face. Miss Ventura was bleeding profusely and was ushered into Mr. Combs' house, where she began to throw up from the violent assault. Upon recognizing the damage he had done and the physical evidence of his abuse, Mr. Combs panicked and forced his staff to bring Miss Ventura to a hotel suite at the London Hotel in Los Angeles, where she was required to stay for a week. During the stay, as her injuries from the beating healed, Miss Ventura began to really realize that Mr. Combs' tremendously loyal network not only knew about and witnessed his assault, but also that these witnesses were not willing to do anything meaningful to stop Mr. Combs' behavior. She recognized that she was powerless and that reporting Mr. Combs to the authorities would not alter Mr. Combs' status or influence, but would merely give Mr. Combs another excuse to hurt her. While in the hotel, she asked to go home to her parents, but Mr. Combs wouldn't let her leave. She lied to her mother when asked about an online gossip forum that reported the assault. Mr. Combs proceeded to instruct his assistant to purchase excessive amounts of gifts for Miss Ventura, which were delivered to the hotel room where she remained trapped. Miss Ventura was terrified, isolated, and unable to see a pathway out of Mr. Combs' abuse hold on her life. She found herself becoming numb to the abuse she was experiencing and became entirely beholden to Mr. Combs' demand. She began to blindly follow his instructions out of the fear of, again, being on the receiving end of a vicious beating. By Mr. Combs' own admission, his relationship with Miss Ventura was like Bobby and Whitney, a clear acknowledgement of the unequal power dynamic and excessive domestic violence that permitted their relationship. From the outside looking in, Miss Ventura had heard others refer to her relationship with Mr. Combs as Ike and Tina. Her volatile and abusive partner, who also owned her label and therefore held her future success in his hands, had fully exerted control over every aspect of her life. Mr. Combs forces Miss Ventura into trafficking. Within a few months of beginning a romantic relationship with 40-year-old Mr. Combs, the 22-year-old Miss Ventura felt beholden to his whims and demands. While in New York City, Mr. Combs told Miss Ventura that he wanted to engage in a fantasy of his called, vulgarism. Mr. Combs said that it would turn him on if he saw Miss Ventura with another D. Child. The first time Mr. Combs hired a man and brought the man to his home in Los Angeles, the man, Mr. Combs, and Miss Ventura wore masquerade masks and ingested drugs. Mr. Combs directed Miss Ventura to perform X acts with this man while Mr. Combs watched them. He played with his thing while he directed Miss Ventura and the band to specific sexual acts. The entire encounter lasted multiple days. Mr. Combs began to call the arrangement a freak-off, or FO. He would repeatedly tell Miss Ventura at random moments that he wanted an FO, and Miss Ventura was eventually expected to felicitate the location and the hiring of male ex-workers. At certain points during Miss Ventura and Mr. Combs' relationship, he would insist on an FO weekly. Mr. Combs would repeatedly tell Miss Ventura that this practice was our thing and our secret. FOs would often take place in hotel suites, including at the Trump International Hotel in Columbus Circle, Beverly Hills and London Hotel in Los Angeles, the Intercontinental Central City and Intercontinental Atlanta, the Intercontinental New York City, the One Hotel in New York and in Miami, the Meriden Oriental Hotel and in Miami, the Fontainebleau in Miami, and the Beverly Hills and the Shutters on the beach of Los Angeles. On one occasion around 2013, Mr. Combs had an FO set up at the Intercontinental Hotel in New York City, after which he was charged with tens of thousands of dollars in damages by the hotel. Upon information and belief, Mr. Combs' chef of staff, Tony Fletcher, paid the invoice charged by the hotel. Dang, what y'all think they did up in that hotel? $10,000 worth of damage? That's them drugs, y'all. Miss Ventura was eventually instructed to use websites and escort services to find male ex-workers to participate the FOs. Remember, FOs are freak-offs. Mr. Combs told Miss Ventura to search for large black penises on the website. Sometimes Mr. Combs would pay to fly male ex-workers to his location, including to multiple cities in the United States as well as abroad. He required Miss Ventura and his staff to help him make these arrangements. Mr. Combs' assistants would help to set up the FOs, including by setting up hotel suites with baby oil and Astroglide. Child, I don't even want to know. Mr. Combs also supplied Miss Ventura and the S worker with copious amounts of drugs before and during the FOs. Miss Ventura was given ecstasy, cocaine, GHB, ketamine, marijuana, and alcohol in excessive amounts during FOs, which allowed her to disassociate during these horrific encounters. It became commonplace to get IV fluids in days after an FO to occur from the excessive substance pushed upon her. Miss Ventura was required to dress up in lingerie for an FO, and Mr. Combs insisted she wear white nail polish to contrast her nails with the skin of a black man he hired to have sex with her. During the FOs, Mr. Combs would instruct Miss Ventura to pour excessive amount of oil over herself. Mr. Combs would then instruct Miss Ventura and sex workers to speak to each other, and then would specifically tell Miss Ventura where to touch the S workers. Mr. Combs would say things like, "Grab that big black D," and ask her, "How does it feel?" as he directed her to perform for him. Child, we on page 18. Let's keep going. During the FOs, in addition to directing Miss Ventura and masturbating, Mr. Combs would use his phone, laptop, and tablet to film Miss Ventura having sex with the hired S workers. He treated the forced encounter as a personal art project, and adjusting the candles he used for lighting to frame the videos he took. While Miss Ventura quickly deleted any photographers or video of S acts if they were taken on her phone, Mr. Combs repeatedly made clear that he retained many videos of Miss Ventura doing FOs. Even when she deleted the videos, Mr. Combs would tell Miss Ventura that he was able to recover deleted videos from her devices. On one occasion, he sat next to her on a flight and made her watch a video she thought she had deleted, reinforcing her inability to escape the emissive power he held over her. Mr. Combs would pay the male S workers a few $1,000s in cash for their services. During some FOs, Mr. Combs would become extremely intoxicated and would hit Miss Ventura in front of the male S workers. Mr. Ventura was repulsed by Mr. Combs' demands, but between the physical beating and the recognizing his incredible power and incredible temper, Miss Ventura became petrified of her partner and boss and felt that she could not say no. He even would present her with lavish gifts prior to or in the middle of FOs, seemingly acknowledging the ways in which these forced S encounters constituted work for Miss Ventura and that he needed to compensate her for this work. At one point, he had given her so many designer bracelets for FOs and immediately followed his brutal beatings that she felt that she was shackled by his presence. Frequently, her anxiety before an FO would become so great that she would become physically ill, sometimes to the point of vomiting. While kneeling over the toilet, Mr. Combs would shame her into performing for him, eventually forcing her to get up and proceed with the encounter. She knew firsthand that telling Mr. Combs that she did not want to engage in FOs was met with anger and violence. In addition, any suggestion that Mr. Ventura would refer to the FO or otherwise report Mr. Combs' abuse was met with ultimatums by Mr. Combs, who would say that Miss Ventura could not go to the police because she had a lot to lose. Around August 2015, for example, in the middle of a surprise birthday dinner for Miss Ventura's 29th birthday, Mr. Combs insisted that Miss Ventura leave the party and go to a hotel for an FO. When she expressed that she did not want to go, Mr. Combs had Miss Ventura cornered by his security staff in order to force her to leave with him. After this FO, Mr. Combs and Miss Ventura went back to the hotel room that Miss Ventura was staying in, where some of Miss Ventura's friends were already hanging out. Mr. Combs was severely intoxicated and at one point during the night picked up one of Miss Ventura's friends like a child and dangled the friend over the balcony of the 17th floor hotel suite. Miss Ventura and her friends were scared by Mr. Combs' erratic behavior, but Miss Ventura was heavily sedated because of the drugs she took to participate in the FO and therefore wasn't able to respond to Mr. Combs' terrifying behavior. The FOs became more work for Miss Ventura, and despite her protestation, Mr. Combs insisted on these intricately staged and forced sexual encounters between Miss Ventura and various male S workers. Miss Ventura tries to escape Mr. Combs' abuse. Anytime she tried to escape to create distance between her and Mr. Combs, he used his networks to find her and convince her to return to his abuse. On multiple occasions, Mr. Combs sent his employees to lure Miss Ventura back. In 2011, during a rough patch, Mr. Combs and Miss Ventura's relationship, Miss Ventura had a brief relationship with musician Kid Cudi. When Mr. Combs returned from a trip, he demanded another FO with Miss Ventura. She acquiesced. During the FO, Mr. Combs found Miss Ventura's phone and found emails between her and Kid Cudi. Mr. Combs became enraged and proceeded to place a manual corkscrew between his fingers and lunged at Miss Ventura. Miss Ventura ran away to stay at Kid Cudi's home to escape Mr. Combs' wrath. Soon thereafter, one of Mr. Combs' staff members told Miss Ventura that he needed to just talk to Mr. Combs, even though Mr. Combs was enraged. Feeling like she could not escape Mr. Combs and his network of enforcers, Miss Ventura returned to Mr. Combs. He hit her several times and then kicked her in the back as she tried to run out the door. She went to her parents' home in Connecticut, where her mother took pictures of the bruises Mr. Combs had left on Miss Ventura's body. In February 2012, during Paris Fashion Week, Mr. Combs told Miss Ventura that he was going to blow up Kid Cudi's car and that he wanted to ensure that Kid Cudi was home with his friends when it happened. Around that time, Kid Cudi's car exploded in his driveway. Miss Ventura was terrified as she began to fully comprehend what Mr. Combs was both willing and able to do to those he believed had slighted him. In 2015, Miss Ventura spoke to a popular music manager at an after-party in a hotel suite in Las Vegas. Mr. Combs saw her speaking to this manager and sternly told her to step into the bedroom adjoining the suite. In the bedroom, Mr. Combs beat Miss Ventura severely. She ran from corner to corner of the room, trying to avoid Mr. Combs beating and kicking. When she tried to lock herself in the bathroom, he pushed through and punched and kicked her while she curled up under the toilet. Her screams were drowned out by the loud music playing in the outside area of the hotel suite. When Mr. Combs, head of security and assistant, saw Miss Ventura after the assault, they began to cry. Miss Ventura had 2 black eyes, a bust and bruised lip, and a huge whelp on her forehead. Upon seeing the results of his vicious attack, Mr. Combs immediately took steps to conceal his wrongdoing. He forced Miss Ventura to stay at his home in Holmby Hills along with one of his sons. While there, Mr. Combs FaceTimed Miss Ventura and stated, "You gotta go up and put more makeup on. My son can't see you like that." She did put makeup on per Mr. Combs' demands. Miss Ventura felt that she had no choice but to obey her abuser. Even though security guards, assistants, and friends saw the situation she was in, no one dared to help her or speak up on her behalf. She therefore had no choice but to remain subservient. Later in 2015, while shooting a movie in Cape Town, South Africa, Miss Ventura began a flirtatious relationship with an actor. She spent New Year's Eve with this actor, but Mr. Combs soon found out. Mr. Combs called the actor and threatened him. The actor proceeded to call Miss Ventura and tell her, "You really need to call Mr. Combs." In or around March 2016, during an FO, remember FO is freak off, at the Intercontinental Hotel in Central City, Los Angeles, Mr. Combs became extremely intoxicated and punched Miss Ventura in the face, giving her a black eye. After he fell asleep, Miss Ventura tried to leave the hotel, but as she exited, Mr. Combs awoke and began screaming at Miss Ventura. He followed her into the hallway of the hotel while yelling at her. He grabbed at her and then took glass vases in the hallway and threw them at her, causing glass to crash around them as she ran to the elevator to escape. She managed to get into the elevator and then she got to the lobby, quickly took a cab to her apartment. Upon realizing that her running away would cause Mr. Combs to be even more angrier with her and completely stuck in his vicious cycle of abuse, Miss Ventura returned to the hotel with the intention of apologizing for running away from her abuser. When she returned, hotel security staff urged her to get back into a cab and go to her apartment, suggesting that they had seen the security footage showing Mr. Combs beating Miss Ventura and throwing glass at her in the hotel hallway. Upon information and belief, Mr. Combs paid the Intercontinental Central City $50,000 for the hallway security footage. Wow. From that evening. After this, Miss Ventura left her home in Comstock and went to hide away at a friend's home in Florida. James Cruz, president of Bad Boy Management, tracked Miss Ventura down and told her that her single would not be released if she did not answer Mr. Combs' phone calls. Answer Mr. Combs' phone calls. You guys hear this? A woman who worked at Sony Music reached out to her with a similar ultimatum concerning her record. Incredibly, Mr. Combs even convinced one of his attorneys to call Miss Ventura at this time. This lawyer told Miss Ventura that it's in her best interest to call Mr. Combs back. Each time Miss Ventura tried to run away, Mr. Combs and his powerful network would force her back to him. Mr. Combs' tight hold over her life had irreparably damaged her friendships. Around 2018, when Miss Ventura was with her friend Carrie Morgan in her house, Mr. Combs used his key to Miss Ventura's house and came in unannounced. He and Miss Morgan had an altercation during which Mr. Combs threw a hanger at Miss Morgan. Upon information and belief, the incident resulted in a settlement between Mr. Combs and Miss Morgan, and Miss Ventura ended up paying Miss Morgan additional funds in an attempt to resolve the dispute between her close friends and her abuse and controlling boyfriend. The relationship between Miss Ventura and Mr. Morgan has been strained since this time. Seeing the extreme measures Mr. Combs took to keep a tight hold on Miss Ventura and isolate her from her support network, and having experienced the repercussions of rejecting his demands, Miss Ventura felt that saying no to Mr. Combs would cost her something: her family, her friends, her career, or even her life. Mr. Combs, double R, we're going to capital R that, Miss Ventura. By 2017 and 2018, Miss Ventura became desperate to leave Mr. Combs and his abuse of her. She recognized that if she stayed with him, she would never be able to have a successful career or ever be physically and mentally safe. She therefore became determined to completely break away from Mr. Combs and his cycle of abuse, and made concerted efforts to avoid him. In September 2018, she joined Mr. Combs for a dinner in an Italian restaurant in Malibu, California, for what she believed would be a decision about concluding their relationship for good. After dinner, Mr. Combs and Miss Ventura returned to Miss Ventura's home, which was paid for by Mr. Combs. Mr. Combs forced himself into her apartment and tried to kiss Miss Ventura. She told him to stop and attempted to push him away. Mr. Combs then forcibly pulled Miss Ventura's clothing and unbuckled his belt. He proceeded to Miss Ventura while she repeatedly said no and tried to push him off. Soon thereafter, Miss Ventura took steps to completely separate herself from a long-time abuser, including by leaving the house that he paid for and returning the car he purchased for her. Despite moving away, Miss Ventura's address was posted online in early 2019, leading to fears for her safety. Miss Ventura, who was under immense duress during the months after Mr. Combs R'd her, took all steps possible to entirely remove herself from abusers ambit, including by entering into contracts to end her record deal with Bad Boy Entertainment. Mr. Combs' ex and physical abuse of Miss Ventura has caused her lifelong harm. As a result of the immense trauma Miss Ventura endured for over a decade with Mr. Combs, she has suffered and continues to suffer from immense emotional distress. Following her escape from the cycle of abuse and sex trafficking she endured, she struggled with the physical and mental manifestations of her trauma. The birth of her 2 children, however, allowed her to a new lease on life and gave her purpose. She credits her children with saving her from the trauma that had consumed over a decade of her life. Except for the months when she was pregnant with her children, Miss Ventura struggled with her addictions to drugs and alcohol, addictions that were established and fueled by Mr. Combs. She turns this substance to drown out the memories of her abuse without being intoxicated. She suffered from horrific nightmares and forced acts that Mr. Combs demanded she participate in during their regularly scheduled FOs, remember FOs are free calls, and the physical beatings that she endured throughout her relationships. She had difficulty eating or sleeping, and her relationship with her family suffered. During this time, she frequently had thoughts of ending her life. To rebuild her life and her career, Miss Ventura needed to completely reinvent herself. She checked herself into an inpatient treatment at a rehabilitation center, where she first confronted the extent of the trauma she lives with. She was required intense therapy and other medical care to recover from Mr. Combs' abuse, and she will forever live with the physical and psychological repercussions of over a decade of violence, fear, and exploitation she endured. Although Miss Ventura wasn't able to speak up against the years of abuse she endured at the hands of Mr. Combs, she has since been able to rebuild her life and confront her trauma. Thanks to the passage of New York's Adult Survivors Act and California's Abuse Accountability and Cover-Up Act, she is now ready and able to also confront her abuser and to hold him and those who enabled his abuse accountable for their actions. First class of action, trafficking under 18 U.S.C. against all defendants. I'm not sure why it says under 18, because she was over 18, but I don't know that part, you guys. You can look that up for yourself. Plaintiff repeats and realleges each and every allegation in all of the preceding paragraphs as is fully set forth herein. Plaintiff is a victim of sex trafficking within the meaning of 18 U.S.C. 159 A and B, and therefore entitled to bring a civil action under 18 CSC. The defendant's acts and omissions taken separately and or together as outlined above constitute a violation of 18 U.S.C. Specifically, defendant Sean Combs perpetrated S trafficking of Miss Ventura by requiring her to engage in forced S acts in multiple jurisdictions, and all defendants benefited from Mr. Combs' venture by holding Miss Ventura an artist signed with defendant Bad Boy Records and otherwise employed by the other defendant Doe Corporations captive to Mr. Combs' demands and desires. At all relevant times, defendants participated in the facilitated and harboring and transportation of plaintiff for purposes of as endorsed by force, fraud, or coercion. The defendant cooperates every financial and otherwise benefit as a result of these acts and omission by keeping Mr. Combs, the volatile owner of the defendant corporation, satisfied. They benefited from feliciting his behavior to the extent it kept the mercurial music mogul happy and kept Miss Ventura obedient to Mr. Combs and the corporation's interests. Defendant Combs and defendant Bad Boy Records, Bad Boy Entertainment, and Doe Corps formed a venture as defined as 18 U.S.C. 1594, given that they consisted a group or two or more individuals associated in facts, whether or not legal entity. As a direct and proximate results, the defendant unlawful conduct as alleged here and above, the plaintiffs have suffered physical injury, severe economic emotional distress, and anxiety, humiliation, also embarrassment, reasonable post-traumatic stress disorder as possible under 18 CSC. Second case of action, violation of New York services and violation of human trafficking New York services law against all plaintiffs. Plaintiff repeats and alleges each of every allegation in all of the preceding paragraphs as if fully set forth herein. Plaintiff is a victim of sex trafficking within the meaning of New York penal law and is therefore entitled to bring a civil action under New York constitute a violation services. Of New York the defendant's acts of omissions taken separately and are taken as outlined above. Sex trafficking of Miss Ventura by requiring her to engage in forced acts in the state of New York, and all defendants benefited from Mr. Combs' venture by holding Miss Ventura an artist signed with defendant Bad Boy Records and other employed by other defendant Doe Corporations captive to Mr. Combs' demands and desires. At all relevant times, defendants participated in and felicited the harboring and transportation of plaintiff for purposes of as endorsed by force, fraud, or coercion. The defendant corporations have financially and otherwise benefited as a result of these acts and omissions by keeping Mr. Combs, the volatile and explosive owner of the defendant corporation, satisfied. They benefited with feliciting his behavior to the extent it mercurial music mogul happy and kept Miss Ventura obedient to Mr. Combs and the corporation's interests. As a direct and proximate results of defendant's unlawful conduct as alleged here than above, the plaintiff has suffered physical injury, severe emotional distress and anxiety, humiliation, embarrassment, post-traumatic stress disorder, economic harm, and other consequential damages. Plaintiff also seek reasonable attorney fees as provided by New York Society Services. Third case of action, violation of California Trafficking Victims Protection Act, California Civil Code. Plaintiff repeats and alleges each and every allegation, all of the preceding paragraphs, as if fully set forth herein. Plaintiff is a victim of sex trafficking within the meaning of Cali Penal Code and is therefore entitled to bring a civil action under Cali Civil Code. The defendant's acts and omission taken separately and altogether as outlined above is pretty much the same thing that I've read already for the other ones. Is just repeating that. I guess it's just, they got to file the same in each state. Okay, we're going to go on a little bit, just skip ahead. Okay, because like I said, it was the same thing. Now we're going to go to a fourth case of action, battery under New York law. Plaintiff repeat and realleges each and every allegation in all the preceding paragraphs is as fully set forth herein. In performing the conduct described above, defendant committed a battery against plaintiff because he intentionally engaged in unlawful, intentional, and offensive touching of application of force to plaintiff persons. Defendant's actions amount of violations under New York penal law gives all the different
analogous
laws,
California law and common law of New
as
York and California. As a result of Mr. Combs' alleged conduct, plaintiff has suffered physical injury, severe emotional distress, humiliation, embarrassment, anxiety, economic harm, and other consequential damages. The conduct of Mr. Combs described above was willful, wanton, and malicious. At all relevant times, Mr. Combs acted on conscious disregard of plaintiff's rights and feelings, acted with the knowledge of her with reckless disregard for the fact that his conduct was certain to cause injury and or humiliation to plaintiff, and intended to cause fear, physical injury, and or pain and suffering to plaintiff. By virtue of the foregoing, plaintiff is entitled to recover punitive and
extemporary damages from Mr. Combs according to proof at trial. These actions is timely because it falls within CPLR 214-J and is brought during the one-time period set forth in this section. The claims brought herein allege intentional and negligent acts that or of omissions for physical,
offenses,
psychological, or other injuries
suffered as
of
a result
the New
of the
York
conduct
penal law, and such acts as or omissions were committed against Ms. Victoria when she was over 18 years of age. The action also falls within California adult X abuse law and is brought during the 3-year time period set forth in this action. Offenses
cause of
as
action
defined in Article 1 through 30 of the New York penal law, and such acts as or omissions were committed against Ms. Victoria when she was over 18 years of age. The action also falls within California adult X abuse law and is brought during the 3-year time period set forth in this action. Fifth cause of action, S assault pursuant to the California S Abuse and Cover-Up Accountability Act, California Civil Rights Procedures. Plaintiff repeats and alleges each and every allegation in all the preceding paragraphs as is fully set forth herein. Defendant Mr. Combs subjected plaintiff to S abuse, X battery, R grape, and forcible act of S penetration, as defined in California Penal Code 234.4-261 and 289. In doing it, so he intended to and did cause harmful and sexual offensive contact with their person and place them in imminent apprehension of such contact. Defendant corporations were entities engaged in a cover-up as defined in California Civil Code, because defendant corporations took concerted efforts to hide evidence relating to the above described S assaults that incentivize individuals to remain silent or prevented information relating to the S assaults from becoming public. As a direct and proximate result of defendant's unlawful conduct as alleged herein above, plaintiff has suffered physical injury, severe emotional distress and anxiety, humiliation, embarrassment, post-traumatic stress disorder, economic harm, and other consequential damages. Sixth cause of action, violations of Victims of Gender-Motivated Violence Act, New York City Administration Code 10-1101. Plaintiff repeats and realleges each of every allegation in all of the preceding paragraphs as if fully state for herein. The above described conduct by defendant Mr. Combs, including but not limited to Mr. Combs' repeated physical and S assaults of plaintiff in New York City, constitutes a crime of violence, and a crime of violence motivated by gender against plaintiff as defined by the law, defined by New York City VGMVPL. The above described conduct of defendant Mr. Combs, including but not limited to Mr. Combs' repeated physical and X assaults of plaintiff in New York City, constitutes a crime violence against plaintiff as a crime of violence motivated by gender as defined in 10-1103. The term of crime violence means an act of series or acts that will constitute a misdemeanor or felony against the person as defined in state or federal law, or that will constitute a misdemeanor or felony against property as defined in state or federal law if the conduct persons a serious risk of physical injury to another, whether or not those actions have actually resulted in criminal charges, prosecution, or conviction. The term crime of violence motivated by gender means a crime of violence committed because of gender or on the basis of gender, and due at least in part to an amorous base of the victim's gender. Defendants' corporations enable Mr. Combs' commission of the crime or violence motivated by gender and are therefore also liable under the VGMV CPL. As a direct and proximate result of the aforementioned crime of violence and gender-motivated violence, plaintiff has sustained and will continue to sustain monetary damages, physical injury, pain and suffering, and serious physiological and emotional distress, entitling her to an award compensatory and punitive damage, injunctive and declaratory relief, attorney fees, and costs and other remedies as this court may deem appropriate damages as set forth in 10-1104. The above described conduct of defendant Mr. Combs constitutes a S offense as defined in Article 130 of the New York Penal Law. Pursuant to 10-1105, this case of action is timely because it is commenced within 2 years and 6 months after September 1st, 2022. Seventh course of action, sexual harassment, gender discrimination, and hostile work environment under New York State Human Rights Law, New York Executive Law, NYSHRL, against all defendants. Plaintiff repeats and re-alleges each and every allegation in all of the preceding paragraphs as in fully set forth herein. Defendant's discrimination against plaintiff on the basis of her gender in violation of NYSHRL by subjecting plaintiff to disparate treatment based upon her gender, including but not limited to subjecting her to assault and or harassment, capital R, and a hostile work environment. As a direct and proximate result of defendant's unlawful discriminatory conduct in violation of the NYSHRL, plaintiff has suffered and continues to suffer monetary and or economic harm for which she is entitled to an award of monetary damages and other relief. As a direct and proximate result of defendant's unlawful discriminatory conduct in violation of the NYSHR, plaintiff has suffered and continues to suffer severe mental anguish and emotional distress for which she is entitled to an award of monetary damages and other relief. Defendant's unlawful and discriminatory actions were intentional, done with malice, and or showed a deliberate, willful, wanton, and reckless indifferences of plaintiff's rights under the NYSHRL, for which plaintiff is entitled to an award of punitive damages. This action is timely because it falls within CPLR 214-J and is brought during the 1 year time period set forth in this section. The claims brought herein allege intentional and negligent acts and or omission for physical, psychological, and other injuries suffered as a result of conduct that will constitute S offenses as defined in Article 130 of New York Penal Law, and such acts as or omissions were committed against Ms. Ventura when she was over 18 years of age. Eighth cause of action, S harassment, gender discrimination, and hostile work environment under New York City Human Rights Law, NYC administration. Plaintiff repeats and realizes each and every allegation in all the preceding paragraphs as if fully set forth herein. Defendants have discriminated against plaintiff on the basis of her gender in violation of NYCHRL by subjecting plaintiff to disparate treatment based upon her gender, including but not limited to subjecting her as assault and harassment, capital R, and hostile work environment. As a result and proximate result of defendant's unlawful discriminatory conduct in violation of the NYCHRL, plaintiff has suffered and continues to suffer monetary and or economic harm for which she is entitled to an award monetary damages and or relief as a result of proximate results of defendant. Therefore, discriminatory conduct in violation of NYCHRL, plaintiff has suffered and continues to suffer severe mental anguish and emotional distress for which she is entitled to an award monetary damages and other relief. Defendant's unlawful and discriminatory actions were intentional, done with malice, and or showed a deliberate, willful, wanton, or reckless indifference of plaintiff's rights under the NYCHRL, in which plaintiff is entitled to an award of punitive damage. This action is timely because it falls within a CPLR 214J and is brought during the 1 year time period set forth in that section. The claims brought herein allege intentional and negligent acts and or omission for physical, psychological, and other injuries suffered as a result of conduct in which constitute as offenses as defined in Article 130 of New York Penal Law, and such acts and or omission were committed against Ms. Ventura when she was over 18 years of age. Prayer of relief. Wherefore, plaintiff prays judgment by entered in her favor against defendants and each of them as follows. Oh, child, we done made it to the end. Thank God. Okay. That's the last page, y'all. For a money judgment representing compensatory damages, including consequential damages, lost wages, earning, and all other sums of money, together with interest on these amounts according to proof. For a money judgment for mental pain and anguish and severe emotional distress according to proof. For punitive and exemplary damages according to proof. For attorney's fees and costs, for pre-judgment and post-judgment interest, and for each other and further relief as the court may deem just and proper. Date November 16th, New York. Respectfully submitted. And I guess that's her attorney's names and all that. Like I said, this was a very long read. I hope you guys enjoyed me sitting up here reading this to you. I want to know you guys' thoughts down below. I'm going to cut this video so I can make it into another one to get more thoughts on it. But it's your girl Dominique, and I'm going to catch you guys on the next video. Later. And don't forget, like, comment again.